In today's video, I'm going to show you how to do a quick DIY repair on a damaged wall. And I'm experimenting with a product I've never used before. Now, if you watched my last kitchen renovation video, you'll know that I had to rip out and strengthen the kitchen ceiling, which is also the floor of this, my daughter's room. I had to take off her skirting boards to fit in the new 22mm thick engineered oak. And because I installed these skirting boards a few years ago, I know that they're screwed to the wall. Thankfully, I didn't use glue to fix them in position. And generally what I've been doing in here is identifying where the screws are with this very strong magnet and removing them one by one. But on this section of the wall, the first screw came out with the plug because it was loose in the render. So I thought, I'll rip out the entire skirting board without bothering to find the screws with the magnet. And sod's law, as soon as you do that, disaster happens. On a job like this, one of the hardest things is to remove just enough of the damaged section to carry out the repair without opening a massive can of worms. And what do I mean by that? Well, the reason this has happened is the render has lost its key to the wall. I could have re-rendered the whole wall, but this is my daughter's room, so I wanted to minimise disruption. So I've got a great tip to help you keep the repair to a sensible size. I've got to PVA the brickwork anyway, as this creates a great bond for the render. But what you can also do with PVA is knead it into the gap between the brickwork and the render to effectively glue it back to the wall in the area that you're repairing. And when it comes to watering down the PVA, you want to put in enough water to make it runny, but not so thin that it's like milk. I also put a bit of undiluted PVA into the crack as well to make sure there was a complete bond between mortar and brickwork. And with the PVA now set, the render is rock solid. But with a big hole to fill like this, what are our options? Now, when you've got a small hole to fill, you can fill the entire hole with something like this, easy fill. More on this a bit later. And also there's a video, a link to which is coming up on screen now, when I talk about this in more detail. The next best thing I think for a repair of this size is bonding. It's the easiest material to work. It's fantastically easy to tool. That would be my go-to option. But the problem with bonding is you're not advised to use it for external walls subject to damp. And as I've got a load of sand and cement lying around from the kitchen renovation project, I decided in this case to go for a sand and cement render option. And why do we need this base layer? Well, because as you see here, the repair is deep and the top coat of plaster is never more than 3 to 5mm in depth. In fact, the two products I'm trying out today, ProRoll Max, can only be laid on 2mm per coat up to a maximum of 5mm, and the Light 1mm per coat up to a maximum of 3mm. So I'm using builder's sand here for this and a bag of cement. For fairly small repairs like this, I'll mix up the sand and cement in a builder's bucket. For larger quantities, I tend to use my wheelbarrow. I'm mixing in a ratio of 4 parts sand to 1 part cement, which I measure out using a trowel. And then I add some plasticizer. It comes in 5-litre tubs, but here it's in concentrate form. Plasticizer makes the mix smoother and easier to work, and you don't have to add as much water. Speaking of which, for us DIYers, getting the amount of water right is, I think, the trickiest part of mixing mortar. Too dry and it will fall off the wall. Too wet and it will slump when applied. For the next part of the job, we're going to need a bucket trowel, gauging trowel, plasterer's hook, a slightly knackered old plastering trowel, small tool and homemade scarifier or scratch coat tool. The bucket trowel transfers the sand and cement mix from the bucket onto the plasterer's hook. I started applying the mix to the wall with my gauging trowel with pretty messy consequences. You can tell I haven't done this for a while. Much better to use the plastering trowel, as you can see here, and then the gauging trowel to get into the tricky areas and smooth the surface later. When you do this, don't get disheartened and think to yourself that YouTubers make this look easier than it is. I've deliberately shown how messy this can be when the render falls off the trowel and wall. But persevere and practice. The more you do this, the easier it becomes, and you can see gradually that choppy mess turns into quite a decent flat surface. So now that the main amount's on, I'm fine tuning it now. I'm just sort of putting on little bits to build up the layers. I could put some sort of a grading tool, some sort of a stick or something against it to get it really nice and flat, but I'll see if I can do it by eye first of all. And I was worried that the cement was a little bit wet, but actually you can see now it's on the wall. It's really nice. So if you look at this bit here, for example, look at that, it's really nice and malleable. Almost like using bonding. And then it's back to the plastering trowel to trowel the render flat. A quick check with the spirit level, as I want the render to finish 3 to 5 millimeters from the surface. There was a bit of slumping in the middle with the weight of the render, possibly a sign the mix was a little wet, but this can be removed by retroweling once the render has gone off a little. Got to say, I was pretty happy with the gap between the render and the finished wall, and also how flat it was. All that remained was to apply a scratch coat to give the plaster that's coming next a really good key, and I did this with my homemade scarifier. I got this idea from an old builder friend who put screws through a wooden float, but you can also buy something like this online. I protected the newly laid floor with some Prodac masking tape, but some hardboard or ply would probably have been a better idea. I'm going to put a bit of PVA on here. A lot of people wouldn't bother, but if you just stroke it, you can feel a bit of dust coming off it, which could affect the adhesion. If you look down here, and when you're plastering, if you're plastering over render like this, you definitely want to put a bit of PVA on, because what the PVA does is it just stops the water leaving the plaster too quickly, which gives you longer to work with it. See now, I don't know, 3/4 of an hour later, there's no dust coming off that at all, so maximum adhesion for the plaster. Okay, we've also got a crack here, and there's 2 ways you can approach this. Taking a bradawl or something like this, because basically you need to score it out, because if you just try and put a bit of filler into the crack, it's not going to work. So that's one option, take a bradawl and score it out. Slightly better option is a bit more heavy-handed, but we're going to go with this grinder. And I'm a big fan of these diamond-tipped universal blades. And yes, you've guessed it, I'm applying a delicate coat of watered down PVA to assist with adhesion for the filler. So now it was a time for the Pro Roll plaster. Now I've used gypsum, multi-finish and board finish in the past, and I've used Easy Fill to finish off jobs like that. So why am I using this Pro Roll? Well, quite simply, Ross on my Discord forum told me that he'd used it recently to pretty good effect to replaster part of his house, and it got me thinking, because after the renovations in the kitchen and the structural damage, we've got quite a lot of cracks and plaster peeling off here upstairs in the cottage. I was intrigued by this stuff, and I thought I owed it to myself and also to you guys to give it a go to let you know what I thought. And to do this job properly, I thought I'd buy the Max, but also finish off with the Light as recommended by Knauf. We've got a gap here of between 3, well, it's actually between 4, I'm quite chuffed with this, about 4 millimeters. So the plan was to apply up to 2 2mm coats of the Max, as you can't go beyond 5, and then finish off with a 1mm coat of the Light, which can be built up to a maximum of 3mm. I've got this taping knife just because that's what they use in the instruction videos. Never used one of these for plastering before, but anyway, let's see how we get on with it. On with a bit more of the Prodac masking tape, and it's time to begin. This stuff has no doubt been designed to make plastering accessible to the DIY market, but as someone who's more at home with a hawk and trowel, it seemed a bit mad to be trying to get this stuff onto a roller. And believe me, it's not that easy to do, and I'm using a medium pile 9-inch roller as recommended. So I resorted to loading it on with a bucket trowel as if I was icing a cake. I suspect you're meant to plunge the roller straight into the tub without using a tray, but more on that in a minute. And once loaded, applying that plaster to the render was even less satisfying. And I'm now regretting using the 9-inch roller. I was going to go with a mini roller, but I thought, you know, manufacturers say 9-inch. I'm guessing they say that because if you're doing it over a large area, they recommend to use a 9-inch, but for a small repair like this, it's just wasting the material because it's loading it all into the roller, from which we'll never get it out. There was this tricky area a roller can't easily reach, so I used my small tool for this, and I then decided to resort to more conventional means of applying the plaster using my plastering trowel and hawk. I then had a go with a roller to roller it flat and attacked it with the taping knife, which they refer to as a wide spatula. But seriously, my advice to you is, if possible, get used to using a plastering trowel. You get a much better feel for the contours of the wall and will ultimately end up with a smoother finish. Although here, admittedly, given the tricky shape of the repair, I did also resort to one of my widest Continental filler knives. Another must-have tool in your collection. There'll be a link in the description. And what about that crack? Well, I thought I'd whack a bit of Pro Roll Max in there too. Again, using the Continental filler knife, which is probably the best tool for this sort of job. And what now? Well, this is one of the problems with this stuff. You can't apply coats very thick, meaning you need multiple coats for a job like this. And you have to allow 12 to 18 hours or overnight between each coat, which massively lengthens the job. Also, looking at that crack, but at how the scratches in the render have come through the plaster, you can see just how much the coat has shrunk overnight. Anyway, we're on day 2 and it's time for the second coat, and I thought I'd persevere with the roller, doing my best to really immerse it in the plaster. And you could say I was getting the hang of it now. But then I'm afraid I reverted back to the Hawk and Trowel. I just couldn't resist. Why? Because it's just so much easier and, more importantly, less to clear up afterwards. Cleaning the rollers is a massive faff, but if you have a hose pipe, you can use it to good effect like this. And now I've got another sped up sequence because, well, you don't need to see me dithering while I get it flat. But anyway, I use a combination of the plastering trowel and taping knife to get the surface to a state that I was happy with. And by now, I was only a couple of millimeters from the surface. A bit of last minute smoothing and coat number 2 was looking pretty good. And time to put a bit more of the Pro Roll Max into that crack. We were still a few mils shy of the surface in places, not helped by all that shrinkage, so day 3 and a third coat of the Pro Roll Max, and this time, sick of cleaning the roller, I'm afraid I just went straight for the Hawk and Trowel. I'd forgotten I'd done a third coat until I checked the date stamp on the clip, but anyway, with all that done, it was starting to look pretty good. It was time to apply the final coat with the Pro Roll Light. To be honest, I could probably just sanded lightly the Max, but as this is designed to be used in conjunction with the Max, I thought I'd give it a go. And started by sanding down the trowel marks with a 3M sanding block and 180 grit sandpaper. Again, back with the mini roller, but this time applying straight from the container as it's probably designed for, and really plunging the roller in to get as much on as possible. With the rollering onto the wall, pretty straightforward to be fair. So what you immediately notice about the Pro Roll Light is it goes much smoother. Look at that. Just because I can't resist, back to my Hawk, just to take off the low spots. I'm going to leave that now. That is actually a really good finish, but what I haven't done throughout this entire video is tool it again as it's going off, which is what you do with board or multi-finish, as Pro Plasterer Gerard explains in my vid linked on screen now.
There's 3 different setting times, so 3 different trowels, and then sometimes you need to give it a fourth trowel as well.
So I thought I'd have a go with the Pro Roll, but I got to it a few minutes too late to remove any of those trowel marks. But you can see it's certainly worth doing if you can catch it early enough, because I reduced a lot of those trowel mark peaks, which will make it easier to sand the following day. Quick check the ruler and we're pretty much bang on. Look at that. Right, it's a nice finish that. You can see the lines where I tried to smooth it yesterday, but actually this stuff sands beautifully. Literally a couple of minutes with that 3M sanding block and the 180mm grit sandpaper, and the surface was beautifully flat and ready for painting. And when it comes to painting bare plaster, if you watch my vids regularly, you know I'm a bit of a mist coat evangelist, but I was also very impressed with Screwfix's bare plaster paint on my bedroom refurb. If you haven't already got one of these, get one, because they're awesome. Cyclone mixing paddle. So as I had a tub left over, I thought I'd use some of this. 2 coats of the bare plaster paint, and special thanks to 2 fussy blokes for providing me with this excellent mini roller and roller sleeves. By the way, they haven't paid me for that mention. And then 2 coats of Johnston's Perfect Matte, and the repair was complete. So what's the end result? Well, I can't deny the finish you get from Pro Roll is fantastic. With that light sand, it's a professional smooth finish. if I'm going to be uber critical, I don't know whether you can see this shadow here, probably should have sanded this a little bit more with perhaps a wooden block wrapped in sandpaper, just to grade that a little bit better, because there's a very slight line there where it hits the old plaster, and then similarly around here that could have just been gently sanded in better, but that's more criticism of how I've blended it, the old with the new, rather than the product itself. So what conclusions can we draw from all this? I suppose a big criticism of this video is that I've used this product for a spot repair, effectively a small area where it's really designed to help DIYers to maybe replaster an entire wall or room. But hey, as you could see at the start, I've got a lot of other repairs to do in larger areas, so I might do another video if you think it's worthwhile showing this product over larger areas. In terms of its advantages, you've got the ability to spread plaster to a reasonably even depth as if you were a pro. Tooling is relatively easy, albeit the material is very thin because it's designed to be rolled on, so getting a totally flat finish isn't as easy as with multi-finish. Don't forget trying to have a quick retrowel before it goes off. And sanding is very easy, even easier than if you were, say, sanding EasyFill. So let's have a quick look at the disadvantages. You've got the hassle of cleaning up a roller, not to mention all the wastage of that material on it. You've got the shrinkage. Thickness of each layer is limited, not a problem in itself when you compare it with similar products like board or multi-finish, but then compared to them, the set time is so slow, it's glacial at 12 to 18 hours. And then you've got the cost, £36 each, including VAT for each 13 kilograms of material and 10 square meters at 1 millimeter of coverage. When you compare that with multi-finish, you're looking at £10.15 per 25 kilogram bag, 1.5 hours to set and 10 square meters at 2 millimeters thickness of coverage. So it seems that once again us DIYers are being penalised for our lack of skill on something like this, to pay through the nose for a product for the convenience of using it. As I've hopefully shown you today, it's a lot of fun using a plasterer's hook and plastering trowel. So my advice to you, if you've got a couple of rooms that need plastering, have a look at the video that I did with Gerard, where we outlined step by step how to, a beginner's guide to plastering. And if you're really thinking of doing this, there are some fantastic plastering courses out there that you can do. And after a couple of days and a bit of practice, you'll be plastering like a pro and saving yourself a ton of money in the process. All that remains for me to do now is to screw back in place this skirting board at the right height now. You can see it looks really nice when you put it flush with the new floor, where the new floor is underneath the actual skirting, rather than as you sometimes see when new floors are retrofit and you have that rather nasty quadrant around the edges. So I've got to screw this back in and then cork it in place, and then we'll have a complete finished repair. But how did I miss that? So that's it for today. Next week I'm back to the kitchen renovation, which has unfortunately spilled into garden work. More on that in my next video. Hope you found today's video useful. As usual, details of everything that I've referred to today will be in the description below the vid, which of course you can access on your smartphone or PC by clicking on the usual more links. And finally, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.